So if I'm to do something incorrect on an appraisal, I upset somebody and they sue because of that. They cannot sue Dustin Harris. They have to sue the company. Okay. And that's a good place to be in because you now protect your personal stuff from the lawsuit.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
And a big fat welcome to every one of you. Thank you for joining me. If you are a longtime listener, thank you. Welcome back. For those of you who are new, I hope you'll come back. I hope you find this to be beneficial. If you are on YouTube, of course, we encourage you to click that like button. It really does help. Subscribe. That'll help you so that you don't miss an episode. You don't have to listen to all of them, but at least you're alerted when one drops. So would ask you to subscribe. Our subscribers continue to go up. It's nice to be on YouTube. For those of you who are listening and would like to see what happens behind the scenes, I would welcome you to come to the YouTube channel, The Appraiser Coach. Really very, very hard to find, right? The Appraiser Coach on YouTube. Want to pause and remind you that we're sponsored by a couple of great companies, one of them being my E&O, OREP. OREP is OREP.org. That's where you find out more, OREP.org. And Alamode. Alamode is the software that I use to do my appraisals. Yes, I still do appraisals. I've been asked that question. Are you still actively doing appraisals? Yes, I am. Not as many, very few, frankly, couple a month. But I definitely still have my feet firmly planted in the technician world. And I use Alamode. Alamode.com or 800 Alamode. All right, folks, a question comes up quite frequently during my coaching sessions, mastermind meetings, what have you. And the question is, Dustin, should I be a sole proprietor? Should I be an LLC? Should I be a corporation? It is an excellent, excellent question. And just like many appraisal questions that we get, the answer is the same for this question. It depends, right? How many times do you answer appraisal questions with the infamous "it depends"? And why do we answer that way? Because it does depend. It depends on your unique situation. It depends on your situation that may be different for everybody. And so consequently, you really have to look at your individual circumstances. And really, we're going to go about this, and I'm going to give you my opinion, okay, for the majority of you. We'll get there, I promise. But I need to set this up properly because we're really talking about two. When you say, should I be a sole proprietor, a limited liability company, LLC, or a corporation, you're really talking about two different things. They're related, but they're two different things. One is financial, and the other is legal, okay, or liability side. Thus the term limited liability company. We'll get to that in just a second. So I have to preface this, as I usually do on these types of podcasts, by outlining and stating up front, disclaimer, I am not a CPA. I am not in any way a financial counsel to you, okay? And I'm not legal counsel either. I'm not an attorney. And I would, especially on this topic today, highly, not just encourage, but strongly encourage that you get help from those two individuals while making this decision. Yes, I'm going to give you my opinion, but again, your situation is different than mine. And your situation is different than other appraisers. And so I can give you my opinion based on a generality, but please don't take my opinion alone. It might guide you in the right direction, but I would highly recommend that you get in contact with a good CPA and a good attorney and say, hey, here's how I'm set up now. What would you recommend? What would you suggest? Okay, let's first go through a couple of definitions. I think this is important just to kind of lay the foundation. And then we will talk from a financial perspective, and then we will talk from a legal perspective. Okay, and then I'll give you my opinion near the end, though you'll probably figure out my opinion as we go forward, because I'm going to let a few things slip as I typically do. Okay, let's start with sole proprietorship. It is very easy to figure out what a sole proprietorship is based on the title, right? Basically, it is simple. It is direct control. It is the default if you did nothing. And many appraisers are in this boat, right? When someone says, hey, are you a sole proprietor, a LLC, a corporation? The answer, if the answer is I don't know, then the answer is sole proprietor. You're a sole proprietor just by default of opening up your business. There's no paperwork that you needed to fill out to become a sole proprietorship. Yes, you got to do taxes, right? But you didn't have to set anything up with the state, because sole proprietor is just the default of being in business. Now, as the name indicates, it's typically a one-person show. Okay, so for those of you who work alone, which I for many years did, you're probably set up as a sole proprietor unless you went to the quote unquote work the time to set it up. Otherwise, you're probably a sole proprietor, and honestly, it's probably working okay for you. Okay, again, we're going to talk about taxation, and we're going to talk. So, if the financial side is regarding taxation, and we're going to be talking about the liability side as well. But basically, to define sole proprietor, it is by default what everybody is if they don't set up something different. It is very easy. It's low administrative overhead. There's just not a lot that goes into a sole proprietorship. It just is what it is. Limited liability company, LLC. Okay. The definition of a limited liability company is that it provides liability protection. So your personal assets are separated from the business debts. Okay. It also gives you some flexibility in taxation, right? There's definitely some more administrative tasks that have to take place. For example, you've got to do state filings. You've got to set it up with your Secretary of State to begin with. Okay. That's going to cost you a little bit of money, and probably a lawyer needs to be involved at some level. Okay. And again, I'm just giving you overall definitions at this point. We're going to get into the details in just a little bit, but limited liability company as compared to corporation is kind of misleading. It's kind of like saying, hey, is that a condo or a townhouse? One, you're talking about ownership type, condo, and other, you're talking about a style of home, right? And you know what I mean? Like sometimes as appraisers, we've got these things mixed up. Is that a townhome or a condo? Well, it could be a condo townhome, right? They are not necessarily exclusive of one another. And same with someone who says, are you an LLC or a corporation, right? You could actually be both. Stay with me, okay? I'll go back to that in just a little bit, but let's go on to the definition of corporation. With corporation, you've got S Corp and C Corp, okay? Now, I'm not even going to talk today about C Corp, because C Corp are companies like Google, like IBM, like McDonald's, right? These are big companies with big structures. Most appraisers are not C Corps. If they are, you certainly don't need to listen to me about how to set things up. If you're that big, you've got legal counsel on retainer that's helping you, okay? But let's talk S Corp for just a little bit, okay? S Corps, again, by the way, one of the problems with C Corp is this whole, and you probably heard of it, the double taxation rule. This rule of what they call the double taxation problem, okay? And the double taxation problem basically is that a corporation pays taxes on the profits, but then the shareholders also pay taxes on the dividends, okay? Again, this is not really an issue for most appraisers. because if you're setting up a corporation, you're going to be setting up an S corp, which is going to avoid the double taxation problem. Okay, the income and the loss, by the way, is passed through to the shareholders' personal tax returns. Okay, so keep that in mind. Again, this gets a little bit confusing. I'm going to try to make it as easy to understand as possible. Okay, let's talk from a financial perspective for just a little bit. Where do you want to be from a financial perspective? Now, when I talk financial, I'm talking taxes. That's really what this has. When we talk financials with regard to the type of setup that you have as a company, you're really talking about how it is that you are taxed. Okay, how it is that you are taxed. In other words, is it a savings, a financial savings for you to set up an LLC? Is it a financial savings for you to set up a corporation over a sole proprietorship? And I would say in most cases, the answer is yes. It's worth doing because of the different things that you can do with that type of thing. For example, let's say that your significant other, in my case, my wife, is part of the board, right? Is one of the directors, okay? And let's say that she and I go out to eat on Friday, and some might call that a date, and others might call that a corporate meeting, okay? And it's pretty rare that on my wife and I's weekly date that we don't talk about business, and that it doesn't become a business meeting for at least part of that process, right? So in that case, can that be what's considered an expense of the company, and thus the taxation is different than if I pulled out my personal credit card, not my corporate credit card, and paid for the dinner? And the answer is yes. One of the benefits of having a corporation set up is that pass-through is after expense, right? After expense taxes, meaning there are things that you can buy, legitimate things. I'm not saying to in any way to go into that gray area, but legitimate things that you go buy a ream of paper if you're not paperless, and you're using it inside your office, right? Those hideous manila folders, for example, you go down to Staples and you buy those manila folders and you use them within your office. Well, guess what? You don't have to use your personal credit card. You can use your business credit card, and it is taxed different because that is considered an expense within the company. Okay. So in that case, there's some great benefits to having a setup that is different than a sole proprietor. Now, I alluded to something earlier, and I think it's really important that we point this out. Okay. Limited liability company is the way that you are set up as a structure. The way that you are taxed is different. Okay. So, for example, I have a company right now that is an LLC that is taxed as an S corporation. Let me repeat that. I am set up as a limited liability company with the state of Idaho. I am taxed, both my state and my federal funds, I am taxed as an S corp. Okay. This is the thing that I alluded to earlier, that you can't say, is it a condo or a townhome, because they could be both. Okay. So it's a little bit misleading when I say, should you be a sole proprietor, a limited liability company, or an S corp? Because frankly, you could be a limited liability company that is taxed as an S corp. Now, you can simply be an S corp without being a limited liability company. And by the way, I have one of those as well. Now, you might ask the question, well, Dustin, why do you have one LLC that's taxed as an S corp and one S corp that's obviously also taxed as an S corp? And the answer is because the time that I set it up years ago, 20-something years ago, limited liability companies were not really all that popular. They existed, but they were not all that popular. And frankly, a lot of accountants didn't really know that much about them. And the bottom line was, at least the accountant that I was using at the time, it just made sense to set up an S corp. And now to go back and change it would be, kind of a pain. I'm already set up as an S corp. I already function as an S corp. Okay. Now, I think it's important, before we go to a break, to pause and talk a little bit about administrative side. One of the reasons that I will suggest and recommend an LLC over a straight out S corp is because an S corp is much more time consuming to take care of. What I mean by that is there's stricter regulatory and administrative requirements, right? You've got to have bylaws. You've got to have regular board meetings, right? You've got to take corporate minutes. You're really supposed to be keeping a binder or a digital version of that business meeting that I talked about, the Friday night, quote unquote, date with your significant other who happens to be on the board that you're now going to write off because it becomes a board meeting. You really should be taking notes, minutes, if you will, and keeping those somewhere so that if you ever get audited and they say, well, why did you spend, $75 on dinner at this particular restaurant on this particular day? You can say, well, I don't know. Let me look. Oh, here's the meeting notes from that particular meeting. And we talked about this, and this at, that was our regular board meeting, or that was our corporate meeting, or what have you. Okay. So that is important to distinguish. LLC is much, much easier. There's more administrative tasks than a sole proprietor. Yes. Right. You've got to do state filings and operating and agreements and different things like that. But they're very, very flexible when it comes to, regular board meetings and bylaws and corporate meetings and that kind of thing. There's just less administrative stuff to do. And yet you still get the same liability benefit that we're going to talk about after the break. Let's pause and remind you that we're sponsored by a couple of great companies, one of them being OREP. We've been speaking today about protection, right? And we're going to be talking after the break about liability. Folks, don't you want in your back pocket a company who gets it when it comes to your E&O, when it comes to appraisers' E&O? Well, I do, and that's why I choose OREP Insurance. OREP is the company to work with because they get it. They've been in business for decades and they understand appraisers. They have attorneys on staff. They know what's going on. And by the way, they protect you on a state board investigation, which I don't know any other E&O company that does that. That gives you some reimbursement for a state board investigation when you need to hire an attorney. Check it out. Go to orep.org. That's OREP.org. Alamode is my software of choice. Why? Well, because I, like anybody else, want the best. It is the best because of the tools that it has built in, the structure, the integrity. It's software. Does it have bugs once in a while? Sure, but not very much, because it's got a whole team of people working for you to make sure that it's working great. Alamode.com or 800 Alamode. All right, folks, welcome back to the program. We're talking today about, should you as an appraiser in your company be a sole proprietor, a limited liability company, or an LLC, or a corporation? And in this case, we're talking about an S Corp. Now, there's other structures that we could talk about as well, but these are really usually the main three that appraisers ask themselves. If you've never bothered to set up anything, folks, you can probably, even if you have employees, even if you have others that work for you, okay, which kind of flies in the face of the term sole proprietorship, okay? But if you've never set up a structure, that's what you are. By default, you are a sole proprietorship. Now, one of the problems that we talked about before the break with being a sole proprietorship is you don't get the same tax advantages as you might otherwise. Now, some of you don't care about that. Some of you say, you know what, I'm such a small company anyway, Dustin, it doesn't really matter. I don't really want to have to go to an accountant, have a bookkeeper, do all this stuff that is probably going to take to be a limited liability company or an S Corp. And again, those are not necessarily exclusive of one another, as we talked about. Again, remember condo townhome thing. But I would recommend, as a mentor, as a coach, right? They call me the appraiser coach, that you that you look into an LLC or a corporation. If for no other reason, for the financial advantages that you can get by setting it up that way, I would highly recommend it. Now, let's go beyond that for just a second. Let's talk a little bit about liability. Thus, the name limited liability company. What does that mean? Well, you've probably heard the term corporate veil. And corporate veil basically means, and usually you hear it in, could they pierce the corporate veil? Basically, what that's talking about is if you complete an appraisal, and let's say that you inadvertently or even advertently left out the repairs that were needed on the roof, And a year later, the roof collapses or is leaking, and there's a problem, right? And they go back to the appraisal and they say, well, that dirty, rotten bugger didn't say anything about my roof. I'm going to go back and I'm going to sue that appraiser. Okay. If you are a sole proprietorship, you have no veil between you have no separation between you and your personal assets. So if an individual is upset at you and wants to sue you because of your appraisal, they have the right under this structure to sue you and your personal house and your personal cars and your personal bag of gold and whatever else that you might have in your possession. There is no separation between the business and the person, thus sole proprietorship. You don't want to be in that situation, folks. Now, some of you might say, well, Dustin, that'll never happen. I've never been sued in 20 some odd years. Okay. And yet it may still happen, right? You might live in Florida and say, well, hurricanes never hit my area and I've been here forever. And yet the next year you might be hit by a hurricane, right? Why do we have fire insurance? I never have a fire in my house. Well, because it might happen someday. And these are the things that you need to consider. When you have a limited liability company or a corporation, you have now a veil, a wall of separation between you and your person. So if I'm to do something incorrect on an appraisal, I upset somebody and they sue because of that, they cannot sue Dustin Harris. They have to sue the company. Okay. And that's a good place to be in because you now protect your personal stuff from the lawsuit. Okay. So that's a big, big deal, right? That's something to consider. So here's my recommendation. I told you I would get to my recommendation. Okay. I love the tax structure of an S Corp. It is awesome. S Corps provide all kinds of protection. I've got an incredible CPA that does all kinds of legal, ethical, moral things, right? But things he could not do if I was a sole proprietor. It is absolutely worth every penny that I pay him to find these tax advantages that I can take advantage of because I am taxed as an S Corp. However, the amount of paperwork and everything else that has to be done with a corporation, a flat out corporation, so you can be an S Corp that's taxed as an S Corp, obviously, or you can be an LLC that's taxed as an S Corp. That is my recommendation because the limited liability company has less administrative tasks than a flat out S Corp, which we talked about earlier, the minutes and the corporate meetings and all of that stuff. Okay. I know that's very simplistic. I know this goes a lot deeper. I know some of you know a lot more about this than I do, and you're going to jump on and you're going to comment, and I welcome those comments. Please correct the record. But my experience has been with most appraisal setups, and this is until you get really big, which most of us never do. Okay. So whether you are a single person entity or you have 10, 20 employees, my recommendation is that you are set up as an LLC that is taxed as an S Corp. Thank you for joining me today, folks. It's been a pleasure. As always, go create some value.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.
Both on profits, and then you've got shareholders that also pay taxes on their dividends. Okay, you're not going to have that same issue with an S Corp. My phone's ringing, and I can't find my phone. How cool is that? So, brother, Dustin, how long have you been doing this? And you still can't remember to turn off your damn phone. Okay, let's back up to, I don't know what we were talking about. Double taxation, okay?